Good evening, everyone. It gives me real great pleasure to welcome in our midst this evening my good friend Sidharth Bhatia, and I'm really looking forward to this lecture on Marine Drive, which is such an iconic location for all of us who live in Mumbai and who have visited Mumbai, and who of course love Bombay or Mumbai, whichever way you wish to refer to it. So on behalf of the chairman and the trustees of the CSMVS and Dr. Sabyasachi Mukherjee, the Director General of the CSMVS, on behalf of my own committee at the Museum Society of Mumbai and fellow guests who have joined us this evening, welcome Sidharth, and we're all looking forward to hearing about the social structure of early Marine Drive. A few words about Sidharth, and I'm not going to embarrass you, Sidharth. I'm going to say it the way I say it. He needs no introduction, but I'm going to do it. He's the author of several books, topical books, historical books, and I don't know how many articles he's written in his career on so many subjects, contemporary subjects, topical subjects, which are of interest to all of us, including popular culture. He's the founder, editor of The Wire. It's something that I look forward to receiving every day. And those of you who have not yet subscribed to The Wire, I urge you after this talk to link yourselves to the daily news that The Wire gives us. Among Sidharth's many interests is, of course, Bombay, Mumbai, and he has written extensively on these neighborhoods, one of which we're going to hear about today. His writing is insightful, objective, filled with nostalgia. And Sidharth, I'm going to put in a question right now. Can you give us some pointers about the future of reclamation in the city of Mumbai? And what happens to cities when reclamation does take place, how it takes place, and is the interest of the common man kept in mind when this happens? Some of this we're going to hear today about Marine Drive, which is a result of a grand reclamation project in the city of Mumbai. I'm just giving you a brief outline of what you're going to hear today, ladies and gentlemen. This took place in the early part of the 20th century. It was a joint effort of the British administration, Bombay's capitalists and the contractors, and the many toiling workers who made the city their home. We, of course, admire the sea view and the freedom that it gives us. And we also admire the architecture of the buildings, which we now universally call Art Deco, and which were a fabulous eye-opener to the architecture of Bombay, 2 lanes behind this, or 2 main streets behind this, and what the citizens were going to be seeing in the 1920s. And we're going to hear about these citizens, the people who live in these apartments. Who were they? Where did they come from? Why were they occupying these apartments? And most of all, what does Marine Drive and its environs represent to us today? Sidharth is going to delve into this in a lot of depth and with a lot of understanding, and with the many, many layers that comes with this understanding of this wonderful and lovely precinct. So thank you, Sidharth. And before I hand you over to the people who help us week after week, and they've been doing this diligently, our technical team, headed by Jason John. And today we have with us Yashraj, Mrinalini, and Aishwarya. Thank you so much, team, for doing this. We really, really appreciate it. You've kept us connected through these long pandemic COVID times. And Anita, thank you for doing the vote of thanks. Professor Dr. Anita Kothare is the president of the Bombay Local History Society. Many of us are members there, and she's also the vice chair of the Museum Society. So thank you very, very much. Sit back, relax, and imagine you're on Marine Drive. So thank you so much, and over to you, Sidharth. Thank you.
So thank you, Firoza, and for that really warm introduction. I'm glad that you and many others love this city so much. We are all lovers of this city. And while we complain about its many problems, we can't imagine life anywhere else or living anywhere else. Unfortunately, you mentioned the reclamation. Now the reclamation fever has reached reckless levels. Um, it started as one thing in the late 18th century as somewhat of a necessity for the East India Company, which wanted to unite all the islands and increase settlers, increase movement, and increase, therefore, trade. But today it is, as I said, emerged as very little apart from really, I don't want to use strong words because that's not the topic here, but really it has emerged as a little more than just a land grabbing exercise. Everyone sitting here in this audience, and in fact, to my mind, everyone in this city perhaps has an instinctive feeling about what reclamation is to us today. People's livelihoods are suffering. I'll touch upon that. And as always, when these projects happen, the aim is to facilitate the common person, the common citizen, the common harassed citizen, and the end result is quite something else. So I'm going to touch upon that, but in the context of the past. So I was very glad to receive this invite because it's a subject that for me, 1 second, somehow it's got smaller. Well, I'm sure it'll come back as long as everything. So I'm glad to be touching upon and speaking about this subject because it's a subject close to my heart. Nostalgia is certainly part of it. When I was a child, we lived around the corner. We walked on Marine Drive. I have unclear memories, but pretty strong images in my mind, seeing people walking on it in the evenings. And on the Sundays, some of you may remember, at the end of it, Nariman Point, of course, did not exist. At the end of where Air India building is, standing right outside, there was a huge screen, and they used to show documentaries on Sunday evenings. So I have great memories. Many of those memories are associated with buying corn or buying peanuts. All that is gone in the drive to clean it. But Marine Drive still spells not just the sea, not just the city and its engagement with the sea, but it spells freedom. I've always felt that Marine Drive is a symbol of freedom and openness, which this city is very, very well known for. So this is an honor, and the subject I have chosen today is the social structure of Marine Drive, a place that we hold very, very dear. A lot has been written about Marine Drive. I must just tell you, some years ago, I wrote a big piece on Marine Drive for a popular magazine, and I was shocked when I went online to check history, and there was hardly anything. Now, of course, there's a lot being written, and that's great. But there was hardly anything which talked about the buildings, the architecture, the reclamation history, and there's still hardly anything about the people who moved there. Why are some buildings the way they are? Why are residents of a particular kind living in a particular area? And why Marine Drive begins depending on which end you start from. And I mean Marine Drive only the residential buildings. I don't mean the gymkhanas and beyond. So why, when it starts from a particular, if you look from north to south or south to north, you see a discerning pattern emerge. and you can feel it, but you don't know much about it. Some of you will know much of what I'm talking about. Some of you may actually live there, and I request you that if I must give fair warning that you may challenge some of my assumptions, but that would only lead to a robust discussion at the end. So bear with me and forgive me if there are major gaps. All of us know the basics. Marine Drive, originally called Kennedy Sea Face, was created after the sea was filled to create land. It was called reclamation, which the reclamations had already begun in the late 18th century. And this was supposed to be the culmination. Incidentally, a lot of small reclamations kept on going on even after independence. Bombay, Port Trust area, the east side, Bandra side, they kept on going. Reclamation never stopped. And Nariman Point, of course, is a great example, as is Kapare. The idea emerged after the plague of 1896, when many houses and dwellings in the native towns are everything from Mohammad Ali Road to Dobitalao and Girgaon, Thakurdwar, in between Buleshwar, Kalba Devi, they were known as native towns. When many houses and dwellings in the native towns were demolished by the administration for being unsanitary, which was how apparently the natives lived. Most of the plague cases, in fact, all of the plague cases were in the Indian areas. The European quarter was more or less spared, and there was a worry that these places needed to have better sanitation. So new living areas were well planned with sewerage were made in the north after Parel. The city stopped at Parel, and Dada Parsi colony, Hindu colony, Matunga, King Circle, and then on to Sion, they were built. So if you go to any of these areas today, even today, you'll see the following. You'll see the roads are quite broad. I'm talking about, pre-flyover days. The roads are broad. After Dada TT, Dada Circle, every next place you go to, there is a circle there, King Circle, Science Circle, etc. The houses are set back from the road. The footpaths are quite open. There are no vendors. And the other Parsi colony, as well as Hindu colony, are a delight in terms of spaces, as well as in terms of gardens, etc. So that was the plan. And the plan was to shift certain people. And a lot of poor people were shifted, but it essentially was a low middle class area. And with a lot of charity, with a lot of philanthropy, with a lot of encouragement from the administration as well as community leaders, people were made to move and settle down in these places. So this began in the late 1920s and went on. And the people who moved there were Parsis, were Hindus, were Christians behind Parsi colony, were Jains, were Paniyas, were South Indians, and then later on, as Sion came up much, much later, they became a place for refugees to come and live. You'll go to Sion, you'll see that area has a lot of Sindhis and Punjabis. And of course, there's Koliwada tucked away, which is not a part of this exercise. A new private sector project was initiated in South Bombay, first by the government, the Bombay Development Department. But the project involved, and the plan right from the beginning was that the department would do most of the building, but private sector would be brought in, which would involve reclaiming 1,500 acres. The original project came from the private sector. Actually, this idea goes back to the mid-19th century. This became Marine Drive, Churchgate, Reclamation, Colaba Causeway, and towards Kapare. The Kennedy Sea Face was to be The Kennedy Sea Face is, of course, Marine Drive, but the sea was supposed to be from Chowpatty right up to President Hotel. But the authorities ran out of money. As is the norm in this city, there were delays, cost escalation, and most importantly, a scandal which was spearheaded by K.F. Nariman, who was relentless in trying to demand that the genesis and the people responsible for poor construction, for poor reclamation, and for God knows what else be investigated and prosecuted. Later, it was discussed that perhaps Nariman Point was fighting on behalf of Indian contractors. Nonetheless, he did a great service, and the project came to a temporary halt. The inquiry was held in which the chief engineer, George Buchanan, was held guilty. The entire project was called Lloyd's Folly after the governor of Bombay, George Lloyd. Eventually, only 439 or something acres were reclaimed, of which 234.8 acres were sold to the military for a cost of, this will give you a shock, the entire 34, 2.06 crores. And 16.6 acres became what we call Marine Drive. This was in 1929, and the idea was to somehow create public amenities, housing for the middle classes, residential, institutional buildings, and open spaces on both sides, mind you. So institutional buildings, we still have banks, government, and insurance companies. And by the way, this is not the time to speak on that. I'm sure there are architects who are better than I am in this subject. If you notice, the institutional buildings look entirely different. They're still part of the what is called the Art Deco system, but they look very different. And the reason they look different is they're made of different stone. They are tall and imposing, as a finance or insurance company is supposed to be. So if you see New Industrial Assurance or further down various other insurance companies or the banks, you'll see that they loom large because they are all about trust, and they are all about intimidation of people to say, we are here and we are going to deal in money. We are not part of that Art Deco residential thing. As always, the middle classes were forgotten, and Bombay's capital and contractors entered, and I don't think any poor people or middle classes moved here. The plots were auctioned, were picked up by affluent businessmen, financiers, and even royalty. Now, royalty had begun to come in Nepean Road, Malabar Hill, and all along the coast, right up to Worli, where Eden Hall, which was the house of the Scindias, came up, Wankaner, and so many other kings, and especially Gujarat royalty, but also from all far away, Gwalior, etc. So they were interested in keeping homes here. These were grand residences because they lived in their small kingdom, but they like to come to Bombay for rest and recreation. By the late 30s and the late 40s, the first few buildings came up and were occupied. Now, this is, I have not been able to confirm that whether the building started from the Nariman Point side or from the Chowpatty side. I have not been able to. I spoke to a very old resident who said that when our building in the north side was being constructed, some buildings in the south were already there. In any case, Marine Drive was a little late in the game. Oval had already been constructed. There are 16 buildings there. Oval had already been constructed. And that's why you'll see Oval buildings have a lot more vignettes, a lot more embellishments, a lot more design components. Most of these buildings are quite plain in that sense. They don't have any features because by then it was little refined. This is when the contours of early Marine Drive and Churchgate began to take shape. The sale of the plots had gone well, but many potential buyers were skeptical. That was also the time that people in Bombay lived on rent. So tenants, when they were approached later on, I'm just giving you some picture of the what I'm going to talk about, were not confident either. But potential buyers who were from the inner cities said, we are not interested. Because this new precinct close to the sea would take them away from friends, community members, family, and businesses. If you were living in Port, which was still a place to live in, and if you were living in Zaveri Bazaar or Kalbadevi, why would you give up that home and move to this distant location and then go every morning, come back, and then find a way to socialize? Some saw potential. Land in Bombay was always an attraction, is an attraction, if not for anything else than for investment. Many families and community groups got together to buy plots. Many builders picked up plots too. The buildings began coming up, and most of the buyers, in fact, I would say with confidence, all the buyers were Indians. It's important to note that Marine Drive, Churchgate, Oval were not just Indian finance, but Indian design with Indian products, Bharat tiles, plumbing by Indian companies, construction material, and Indian architects were involved in it. All Indian manufactured. Barring Claude Batley, who in any case had lived and worked in India from his 30s for about 20 years by then, and had been the principal of JJ School, along with his partners Gregson and Kings, were the only British involved in terms of designing. There may be one or two others, but mainly it was all Indians, the master Bhuta, Mistries, and then even Batley had become Indianized and he become part of Bombay, president of the Architectures Association, lecturer, and very much in India. The point I'm trying to make is it's something to think about. All along, buildings of grand design or the public institutions or the residential, barring the native towns, was done by the British. I leave Malabar Hill out of it because Malabar Hill was by truly wealthy Indians. These were not wealthy. They were upper middle class, but they were not necessarily wealthy. And because they were buying individual flats. But Malabar Hill is an exception. People started moving it there where the governor moved there to Raj Bhavan. And the people who also moved there was because there was a lot of disease at the lower, on the plains as it were. So they moved there and they had a small neighborhood, an exclusive neighborhood of families. But everybody involved was an Indian. So basically, I have theorized, and I have a lot of people here who can tell me whether this theory works, is that Indians had come of age. Indians in the 40s were saying a very simple thing. We know the British are going to leave one day, very soon, imminently. We know we are going to live and run this city and this country. We will now decide what the architecture should be. We are not interested in British models, but we want to be part of the world. One of the designs and trends that was sweeping the world was what came much later to be called Art Deco, but was called modern at that time. And modernism in everything, including in culture, was on the ascendant. So they said, they looked at the world, they had become world aware, world travelers. They looked at South Africa, they looked at Shanghai, they looked at other places, Paris, London, all the places, most of them on the harbor, on the sea, but not all, because Art Deco is everywhere. There is Art Deco in Cuba, and there is Art Deco in Miami. That Bombay Art Deco is more Indianized, and I think the word one could use is tropical. So if you see, the buildings all have chhajjas and open balconies, so that there is ventilation, but it's protected from the rains, because the rains are coming from across. With Marine Drive and Churchgate and those areas, a big shift took place in Bombay. And the shift was, Bombay turned away from the east to the west. All of the city's outlook became west oriented in more ways than one. This was a generation which said, we are now ready to be part of a global community. And as we all know, all developments after that, residential, the lucrative ones, the attractive ones, the ones that are profitable, appeal to people, are on the west coast, right up to the distant suburbs, right from corporate. The east is coming into its own today, but the east became industrial, it became port oriented, trade, and though there are lovely neighborhoods there, Chembur is a beautiful neighborhood, but those were, yeah, they stopped developing and everything started developing. And I dare say Bombay began achieving its notion about itself of being a city which is outward facing. So imagine you're living or walking on Marine Drive. Even if you're walking, your gaze goes towards the west, and you say, I'm part of the world. So there was sufficient talent by then to do this, and there was sufficient money. The design the architects chose was modern. I won't go deeply into the style, but with these buildings, Bombay entered the modern age. With flats, they were self-contained, quite ventilated, and had, most importantly, I'm going to develop this point, so I'm emphasizing, and most importantly, had a very important feature, till then unknown, more or less. The toilets were inside, not outside. Traditional Indian homes, traditional Bombay homes even, had toilets outside in order not to allow unclean things in the home. Here now you had toilets in the bedroom, in the common passage, and it was just too alien. Incidentally, I think there are still some buildings in Bombay which have the toilet outside. There is a large house which on French Bridge, which belongs to a Kachi family, pretty large building, where of course they must have toilets inside by now, but where there is a connecting corridor passage that goes above ground to a toilet. I've seen that. There must be other places apart from chawls. Now, imagine that from a traditional Indian's point of view, This was sacrilege because now you had to let in people of all kinds of people to enter your home to clean these bathrooms. They go in from the main door perhaps or the side door, and these people may be from other castes, and I think everyone knows what I mean. But that was a revolution. The same thing happened when these flats, Shivaji Park is a beautiful area. And when the same thing happened in Shivaji Park and all the other places where people say, my goodness, the toilet is inside. It was almost a deal breaker for several people. Anyway, the buildings came up. They were rejected by many architects and purchasers as ugly, a chest of drawers, teeth, ugly teeth. But some took the leap and the tenants began moving in. Now, one former landlord's family had a very interesting story. They said that our grandfather used to say that tenants he owned the building, he had built it. This is towards the southern part near Churchgate Street, which is Veer Nariman. And tenants used to come and say, okay, we'll move in from May to September because of the rains and enjoy the rains. But this paint on the wall has to be changed. Now, this poor man had painted the wall according to his previous tenant's requirements. So he had to do it all over again. And they made a lot of fuss and all. So he got fed up. He sold it. It was lapped up by a royal family from Gujarat. And they just kept a flat for themselves, the original builder's family. And they still live there. I would think that about 80 to 85% of the people living in Marine Drive have been living there for 3 generations. Sales don't happen and rentals barely change hands. Even though the rents are very, very low, the price you have to pay to buy that tenancy is quite high. Now, some trends began to emerge. Now, this is where a particular social system starts forming. At the southern ends, that's starting with Riviera and coming up to Shalimar, Oceana, etc., the buildings had a mixed population: Hindus, Muslims, Christians, Jews, and Parsis. And also some of them have guest houses where the British could live. Halfway through, this starts changing. And as we approach the north, which is the last building is Meghdut near the flyover, the purchasers were mainly Gujaratis with a smattering of Marwadis. They were the builders and they were the occupants. Pariks, Nanavatis, Mehtas. Nemchand Mehta built 3 buildings named after his 3 sons, Kapoor, Zaver, and Keval. And you know the 3 buildings which stand there. Wonderful looking buildings. And I understand the flats are very, very spacious. Some of those buildings have now become owned by the tenants. Then there is the Siksarias. They build their own family home. A lot of people build their family homes, which don't remain family homes. I mean, when I say family home, means extended family. And some of these buildings were offered to community members only. So if there was a particular set of Gujarati community, they would offer it to only others. Furthest down, by the way, I think it's F Road or thereabouts, close to the tracks. There are 3 buildings which was built specially by philanthropists from Palanpur for people from Palanpur to come, stay there for a year while they establish themselves, 2 years maximum, and then move. That kept on happening in the initial days, but soon enough, after a few years, the families who came there and lived refused to move out. So the entire place, now everyone pays very, very low rent, and they live there. These are 3 buildings, just Palanpuri is there. But otherwise, they are more or less Gujaratis. And this was just a continuation of a Bombay trend. From the very beginning of the creation of the British city, or the creation of the city, I mean, Bombay goes back much longer, but all of it was ruled by different people or at different stages, right up to the 13th century. But when the British, when the East India Company took over and they bought this place from the King Charles, the second governor or the third governor, I think it's the second governor of the company, Ongier, or the Irish pronounce it slightly differently, went to Gujarat. He had just come from Surat and said, please move here to various communities. So some people started tentatively moving. There were various Gujarati communities. And the condition they laid down was, now you imagine these are 7 islands, very swampy, very dirty, full of illnesses. Their condition was, we will not change our religion. Nobody will impose religion. This came because the Portuguese were trying to do it. And we will live among our community. And the Raj said, sure. So right from the mid-17th century, Bombay, which is, as we all know and love, cosmopolitan, only had people living in their enclaves. I won't call it ghettos, because ghettos means self-enclosed. These were free-flowing. By the end of the 19th century, this had become this trend has become consolidated. So you had Muslims, Muhammad Ali Road, there were non-Muslims live there, of course. You have Gujaratis and Banyas and Jains, some smattering of Marwadis in the entire Buleshwar, Kalbadevi area. Further, you have Parsis, and then further down, Maharashtrians and Kirgaon in Thakurda. Tubitalau is Christian and a few Parsi families. So this had become the norm. Marine Drive just followed the trend. But the southern end buildings were more mixed. Even today, if you go and pick any building, you will find that all kinds of communities live there. The southern end were more mixed. And again, if you notice, from the first building till about Chateau Marine, they all more or less all have Western names. Rivera, Shalimar, Oceana, Earl's Court, which is today Framrose Court, and then Chateau Marine. And just before Chateau Marine, where hotel, I think Intercontinental was Natraj, but the actual place belonged to the Bombay Club, which was where the British lived and partied. So this was, in fact, Oval is full of Queen's Court, Oval View, and all those kind of thing. In between, there is also St. James's Court on this stretch. So you see the difference. And from then onwards, it is Krishna Mahal, Sonawala, Bhartiya Bhavan, and such like, and ending at Meghdut. So, and the population reflected that. They were called by the people in the northern side, and I have this from the horse's mouth from an old resident. He said that these were people who were called cosmopolitan. Now, cosmopolitan at one time and like modern till not very long ago were very loaded words. In a society transiting from Raj to Indian rule, old traditional ways of being considering yourselves Indian hadn't disappeared, even though Bombay was such a multicultural society. Cosmopolitan means that they mixed with each other irrespective of background, caste, community. They ate, drank, and danced with each other at the restaurants that had sprung up on Churchgate Street, Berries, Gurdons, Ambassador, further east, further towards the east, Astoria, Ritz. So, cosmopolitan. And I think um, the message was clear. You're not fully Indian, we are. Soon enough, the younger Gujaratis of the northern sides were taking full part in this cosmopolitanism and clearly went to all those dances, even if they remained true to their traditional diets. But by then, European food, popularly for some old timers, will still remember that word, Conti, loved it. But eventually, those old boundaries were gone. Some remain, but there is still a lot of mixing, and you don't see too many of all communities along the way. But Oval, Churchgate, Dinshavacha Road, J. Tata Road, and then later on Marine Drive, of course, are full of buildings which are mixed. Ghettos, unfortunately, are coming back, and where people from other communities, other beliefs are discouraged or simply not allowed. Vegetarians, single women, everything else. But the essential cosmopolitanism of this city remains, and in its drive towards a modern society which Bombay is proud of, Marine Drive played a big role. And it is nice to know that that spirit still exists, and that I think should be celebrated. Thank you.